My name is Nora Whitmore. I'm 28 years old, and today I return to the place that once erased me. The late afternoon sun poured across the glass roof of Glenridge Regional Medical Center, casting soft gold on the front entrance. There were ribbons, speeches, reporters, a mayor smiling too wide, a banner stretched overhead, Community Healthcare Revitalization Project sponsored by the Whitmore Trust. But I wasn't on stage. I sat quietly in the backseat of a black sedan parked 3 lots away. One driver, one envelope in my lap. Inside, a signed agreement worth $7 million. Sent not in my name, but through a shell foundation. A name no one would recognize. On purpose. I didn't come here for recognition. I didn't come for applause. I came for something else. 12 years ago, I walked into this hospital with a fever I couldn't afford and a made-up name I barely remembered how to spell. They turned me away, I walked out. And from that moment on, I wasn't anyone's daughter, not on paper, not in spirit. But today I came back. Not for revenge, not for drama. Just a quiet pair of white heels tapping across the polished floor, like punctuation marks in a story I never meant to write. No one knew the woman funding their hospital today once slept in a storage closet with a wet towel in place of medicine. I didn't come to be noticed. I came to open a door. The same one they slammed shut when I was 16. I was 16 when my mother slid the college acceptance letter across the dinner table like it was a bill she didn't remember agreeing to. "You got in," she said flatly, barely glancing at it. "Full ride, aerospace engineering, impressive." I nodded, waiting, hoping for a smile, a hug, anything. Instead, my father spoke without lifting his eyes from the TV. "That changes things. Your sister's treatment program isn't covered past July." I looked between them. What does that have to do with me? Mom finally met my eyes. "You won't need the dorm, right? You'll stay home, commute. That'll free up the housing stipend. We'll use that for her rehab." It wasn't a question. It was a command disguised as family concern. "But I earned that. It's part of the scholarship. It's not cash they can just hand you." Dad turned the volume down. Slowly. "You're not going to be selfish about this, Nora. She's your sister." "She's been in rehab 4 times, I whispered. "And I haven't had a birthday cake in 3 years. The silence after that was sharp. Then came the voice that still echoes in quiet rooms. "If you can't sacrifice for your own blood," Mom said coldly, "maybe this house isn't the right place for you anymore." I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood up, walked to my room, and packed what I could into a duffel bag, books, a jacket, my calculator, and the worn acceptance letter I once dreamed of framing. There was no goodbye, no tearful regret. By sunset, my backpack was on the porch and the lock had been changed. My name wasn't spoken again in that house. Except once, 2 weeks later, when they called the scholarship office to report that I had withdrawn from the program. They wanted the check redirected to their bank account. It didn't work. But it told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't family. I was funding. I didn't have a plan. Just a duffel bag, $22, and the number of an old classmate's aunt who worked the overnight shift at the county library. She didn't offer a room. She offered a key. To the attic above the archives, uninsulated, half-lit, and never meant to be lived in. But it had a door that locked. And for the first time in my life, I could sleep without listening for footsteps in the hallway. I pushed together 2 crates and laid a blanket over them. It became a bed. A tiny lamp from the lost and found became my nightlight. The silence was cold and full of dust, but it was mine. I worked nights at a copy shop that paid in cash and looked the other way. During the day, I audited community college classes under the radar. I wasn't enrolled officially, just a face in the back of the lecture hall, scribbling notes like my life depended on it. Because in many ways it did. No ID, no address. No parents to co-sign, no counselor to approve anything. But I had something no one could take from me, time, and I spent it like every second was borrowed. The attic didn't have heat, so I kept my textbooks under my sweater at night. I'd breathe into my hands until they stopped shaking enough to write. I skipped meals often, but never skipped lectures. And every day, I moved a little more out of sight, learned how to shrink my steps, quiet my voice, erase my digital footprints. Because that's what you do when you realize no one is coming to save you. You disappear before the world decides you're disposable. And in that attic, I learned something more valuable than any textbook could teach. Survival doesn't start with strength. It starts with solitude and the choice to stay standing when no one is watching. It started with a coffee spill. A Tuesday morning, 2 minutes before the lecture. I was in the back row again, same seat, same stolen Wi-Fi signal, same cracked laptop screen. Someone in front of me knocked over a cup. It slid off their desk and splashed across the floor right toward my bag. I scrambled to grab it, but someone else beat me to it. A man. Mid-50s, cardigan over collared shirt, wireframe glasses, and tired eyes that had seen too many students pretend to listen. He crouched down, handed me the bag, and said just one thing: "Don't let the chaos define your pattern." Then he stood up and walked away. I didn't know his name. I just knew he wasn't on the faculty list. Later that week, I found a small package wedged inside one of the bookshelves where I always studied. No note, no label. Just a black USB drive and a folded yellow sticky note. "If you solve this, come to room 408. No one else will knock." For 2 days, I stared at it. Part of me thought it was a trap. The rest of me, the girl who used to build paper satellites from cereal boxes, was too curious to resist. So I opened the files. It wasn't homework. It was a raw flight path optimization algorithm, messy, unsorted, and clearly unfinished. It looked like a half-solved Rubik's Cube coded in C++ and frustration. I worked on it at night, between shifts, between hunger pangs and attic headaches. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew how to listen, how to see the patterns hiding in the noise. 4 days later, I had a clean version. I walked to room 408. My hands were shaking. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open slowly. The man from the spill, he looked up, smiled, and slid a chair across the floor toward me. "Took you longer than I expected," he said. "But you're here. That's what matters." No job application, no ID check, just a desk, a second-hand laptop, and a voice that didn't ask who I was related to, only what I wanted to build. That was the first time in years someone saw me and didn't flinch. Room 408 wasn't a classroom. It wasn't even officially on the building map. It was more like a forgotten control room, wires everywhere, outdated monitors, an old corkboard full of push-pinned maps and scribbled notes in Sharpie. There were no titles, no departments, just problems waiting for someone obsessive enough to solve them. The man's name was Dr. Linwood. He had once worked with a government task force on emergency airlift logistics, until a disagreement about data privacy pushed him out. Now he taught part-time and quietly recruited outliers, as he called us. Students who didn't check boxes but noticed patterns, and I noticed everything. At first, I just ran simulations, cleaned datasets, tracked fuel consumption per nautical mile, adjusted for turbulence. Then I started suggesting alternatives. What if we rotated emergency dispatch routes every 13 hours instead of 24? What if weather delays were pre-calculated with a rotating threshold buffer? He didn't compliment me. He just handed me another USB. That was his version of good job. 3 months later, one of our routing suggestions was picked up for field testing. I remember watching the dispatch board flicker to green. An air ambulance rerouted mid-flight. 4 minutes saved. The patient, a 6-year-old girl with internal bleeding, made it to the trauma center in time. No one knew I had touched that flight path. No one gave me a medal. But that night, I stood alone in the hallway of the library attic, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not out of pain, not out of fear, but because something I built had saved a life, and no one could take that from me. That was the beginning. The next summer, I filed the paperwork to incorporate a small data consultancy. Quietly, under a name no one could trace to mine, I kept my head down, built quietly, learned viciously, failed forward. While others chased applause, I studied silence. And by the time I was 23, I was optimizing air rescue logistics across 3 states. Not bad for a girl with no address and a name no one remembered. It had been 12 years since I last walked the cracked sidewalks of my hometown. Nothing had changed, except me. Same rusted gas station sign at the corner. Same diner windows fogged with grease and gossip. Same church bulletin board with the wrong date posted. People didn't recognize me, not at the grocery store, not at the bank, and that was fine. I hadn't come for reunions. I had come for the fundraiser. The local hospital, the same one that once turned me away, was on the verge of collapse. Equipment outdated. Staff underpaid. Emergency response times falling apart. The town organized a benefit gala in the old high school gym. They needed donors, so I sent a check, 6 figures, anonymously. And then, on a whim, I RSVP'd. No red carpet, no reveal. Just me in a black jumpsuit and white heels, slipping in through the side entrance like I always used to in school, quiet, unnoticed, background noise. Until someone tapped the mic. The MC cleared her throat. Tonight's event wouldn't be possible without one of our most generous sponsors. She grew up here, though many may not remember. Please join me in thanking Ms. Nora Whitmore. The silence was instant. Like the gym had exhaled all at once and forgotten how to breathe again. I stood up slowly. Chairs creaked. Forks paused midair. And in the front row, my parents' gray-haired, glassy-eyed turned to look. They didn't recognize me at first. Not until I walked toward the stage. The lights caught my name tag, the name they used to leave off the holiday cards. Nora Whitmore, Director, Whitmore Trust. My father's hand gripped the chair in front of him. My mother's lips parted, no sound, just shock. I passed them without blinking, because this wasn't about them. Not anymore. I took the mic. My voice didn't shake. I grew up here, I began. And once, I was told that saying no to someone you love means you don't deserve love at all. That self-respect is selfish. That boundaries are betrayal. I believed that for a long time. I paused, scanned the crowd, found the eyes of one teenager sitting in the back, arms crossed, hoodie zipped to her nose like she didn't want to be seen, but needed someone to speak. I'm here tonight to tell you that they were wrong. There was no music swell, no thunderous applause yet. Just a slow, rising hush. The kind that happens when a town realizes it remembers you, but never really knew you. I didn't stay long after the speech. The crowd buzzed with polite applause, curious glances, and hushed whispers. I shook hands with the board members, signed one more pledge, then slipped out through the side door the same way I came in, quiet, composed, done. But they followed me. I heard my mother's heels first, familiar rhythm, unfamiliar hesitation. Then my father's breath, heavy behind her. By the time I reached the dim hallway outside the gym, they were there. "Nora," my mother said, voice thin. "We didn't know." I turned just enough for eye contact. "That I was alive?" I asked, "or that I made it without you?" Dad stepped forward, hand half raised like a peace offering. "You could have called. We thought eventually you'd come around." I almost laughed. "You changed the locks," I said. "Filed paperwork to cancel my scholarship. Told people I ran away." Mom flinched. "We were scared. You were just a kid." "No," I said quietly. "I was a resource. And when I stopped being useful, I became disposable." The hallway echoed. Dad's voice hardened. "You're still our daughter." "No," I said, softer this time. "I was your backup plan. And when the backup said no, you pulled the plug." My mother's eyes welled up. Whether from shame or self-pity, I couldn't tell anymore. "Things haven't been easy," she murmured. "Your sister's gone. The house was foreclosed 5 years ago," I finished for her. "I know, I bought it at auction. Not for revenge, just to keep it from being turned into a liquor store." They stared at me like I was speaking a different language. "You'd really let us struggle?" my father asked, almost stunned. "After everything." I took one step forward, close enough that they could see exactly who I'd become. "After everything," I said calmly, "I built something real, something that saves lives, and you built excuses." My mother opened her mouth, closed it. I pulled a black envelope from my bag, handed it to her. "Inside is an address," I said. "It's a volunteer center I fund. If you want to be part of something good, show up Monday at 9 a.m. No cameras. No applause, just work." She looked at it like it was a trap. "We're not janitors," she said coldly. Neither was I replied, but I cleaned up your mess anyway. And then I turned. They didn't call after me. They didn't follow. The door clicked shut behind me softly. No slam, no drama, just the quiet sound of closure. The kind that doesn't echo because there's nothing left inside. 3 days after the fundraiser, I signed the final transfer documents on a rundown property 2 towns over a former textile office that would soon become something else. The Whitmore Shelter for Youth in Transition. Not a flashy name, no branding campaign, just a clean space, warm meals, counseling rooms, and a cot for any kid who got the same voicemail I once did. If you can't sacrifice for this family, don't come back. I didn't send another word to my parents. But life has a strange sense of rhythm. 2 months later, I received an email from a director at the community outreach office. A middle-aged couple had shown up to inquire about emergency housing. They were currently sleeping in their car. No fixed income, no remaining assets. The names? Carolyn and Martin Whitmore, my parents. They hadn't said my name at intake. They hadn't recognized the address either. Just followed a flyer posted at a gas station, promising a new beginning for those left behind. I took a deep breath. Then I walked to the intake desk, pulled out 2 blank forms, and wrote the following at the top. Volunteer application, conditional placement. That afternoon, I waited in the lobby as they arrived. My mother's cardigan was sagging, sleeves frayed. My father leaned on a borrowed cane, the kind hospitals issue, and never asked to be returned. Their eyes were swollen, not from tears, but from weeks of sleeping upright. They didn't notice me at first, until I stood. My mother froze. You're they. Founder, I nodded. Yes. Silence thickened the room like smoke. We didn't know, my dad muttered. You weren't meant to, I said, but now you do, and I have one offer, one only. I handed them the application. We don't offer handouts, we offer purpose. They read the form, confused, then offended. You want us to work here? My mother asked, incredulous. You want us to clean floors and serve food to strangers? I didn't blink. I want you to feel what it's like to be invisible, to be ignored, underestimated, and talked over. And then I want you to do something better with that feeling than I ever could. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's hands trembled. She crumpled the form and dropped it on the floor. You're still bitter, she hissed. All this empire, it's revenge. I smiled, softly. No, bitter people want to be heard. Healed people build systems where they never have to speak again. I turned and walked away. I didn't need them to say thank you. I just needed them to see the door and understand it no longer belonged to them. The plaque on the front wall is simple. No gold, no spotlight, just brushed steel, etched with quiet intent. The Whitmore Shelter for Youth in Transition, in honor of those who were told to leave and chose to stay alive anyway. I walk past it every Thursday at 8 a.m. That's when I meet with the intake team. We review referrals, sign off on supply orders, check the maintenance logs. It's routine, steady, not the kind of work that makes headlines. But last Thursday, something made me stop. A girl, maybe 15, maybe younger, but trying to look older. She sat at the front desk, tapping her pen against a torn hoodie sleeve. Her shoes were too big. Her file said temporary placement, no legal guardian available. She didn't look up until I crouched beside her. Hey, I said gently, what's your name? She hesitated. Callie, she whispered, or I guess that's what I use now. I nodded like I understood because I did. You like math, Callie? Her eyes flickered. Yeah, I guess. I slid a folder across the desk. We run simulations here, real ones. Flight paths, logistics, routing for ambulances, even drones, ever used a heat map. She blinked. No. Want to learn? She didn't say yes. She just nodded barely, but she didn't let go of the folder. That was enough. That afternoon, I updated our staff log, assigned Callie to logistics rotation, let her choose her hours. Later that evening, I passed the hallway mirror near the staff lounge. For a second, I saw not myself, but the version of me who used to sleep behind library shelves and dream in data points. She would have given anything for someone to leave a door cracked open. And now, the door wasn't just open, it had her name on it, and someone else's footsteps walking through. Some people return home to be recognized, to show what they've become, to say, "You were wrong about me." But not me. I didn't come back for the spotlight. I came back for the floorboards. For the cold tile I once sat on, knees pulled to my chest, praying no one would ask me for ID. I came back for the side doors. For the kids who slip in late, too quiet, too guarded, but still here. And I came back for the kind of silence I never had growing up. Not the silence of being ignored, but the kind you earned, when you finally don't owe anyone anything. There's a file in my office, locked, unlabeled. Inside it are the original intake forms from the shelter's first day. At the bottom of one, in shaky handwriting, the line for next of kin is blank. That was mine. I keep it not as a wound, but as a reminder of the blueprint. You don't always need to be welcomed back. Sometimes you come home by building the house yourself, and if you do it right, someone else finds shelter there too. So no, I didn't come back to be seen. I came back to build what I needed and leave the door unlocked.